Olá, pessoal. Estou desmutado, Tudo bem? Sejam bem-vindos a um evento aí promovido pelo Grupo Temático de Internacionalização da ACATE. Dessa vez a gente está aqui trazendo o Mitacs. Eu vou falar um pouquinho em português o que é o Mitacs, depois a gente vai continuar em inglês. O Mitacs é um fundo de amparo à pesquisa canadense que ajuda desde empresas, estudantes, non-profits, professores, quem está fazendo doutorado, e desde janeiro desse ano nós temos um contrato com eles, nós da ACATE, onde que a gente é um parceiro no Brasil. Now I will continue in English because I invited Gina from Mitacs to talk what Mitacs is doing in Canada and how we from Brazil can have these opportunities to hire a PhD guy, a student in Canada to help us. And after this meeting, I will open the questions and answers to ask Gina. And that's it, Gina. Thanks so much for accepting this invite. And now is with you.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. As Enrique said, my name is Gina Saparlo with Mitacs, Senior Advisor for Global Markets. So basically that's helping companies like you to understand how you can use Mitacs to access the Canadian innovation ecosystem, to not only have bilateral partnerships with Canadian innovators, but also potentially use Canada as a platform for the rest of Europe and even North America for global engagement. I'll share my screen so that we can start the presentation and move into the questions afterwards. There we go. I just need to make sure that I am presenting this. Oops. Wonderful. All right. So as Enrique mentioned, Mitacs is a national not-for-profit in Canada that supports the catalyzation of innovation. And basically what that means is that we are not the ones doing the research. We are not the ones, actually actively pursuing new technologies and new developments in areas of novel research, but we are supporting innovators and companies like you to do that. The way that we do that is through a huge network here in Canada. So we get money from the Canadian government, but we also get money from all of the provincial governments in Canada. And what that does is that gives us a huge budget to support not only Canadian companies and Canadian innovators, but international innovators, including Brazil. So we have about, with our federal and provincial funding, actually that number 708 is actually now sitting at about $1.5 billion to support innovators in the next 5 years. We have many international research collaborations, including Brazil, and we have 97 agreements across Canada with different innovation ecosystems that will support you in your connections into Canada to have a research and development community. We've worked with over 8,000 different company and industrial partners. So we're very, very good at how we support you. And that also can translate into connections for you. So when you want to start working with Canadian companies or you want to have introductions, we have that community that is very accessible to you through our relationships. Now, what does the actual support programs look like when it comes to working with Mitacs? Well, there's 3 main components to the programs that then in turn turn into the resources and infrastructure that are going to support you. The first and foremost is that our programs are always providing access to post-secondary institutions in Canada and priority countries, including Brazil. And that access can be to, in Canada, colleges, polytechs, cegeps, and universities. So we want to provide your company with access to the people and the infrastructure available at those entities. as I mentioned, it's access to the latest technologies, tools, and talents across all disciplines. So no matter what sector you're from, we want to make sure that you are getting the best talent and technology and infrastructure in whatever space that your company needs it. So even if you are very, very deep tech and you need a student in business or in psychology to understand your client or to understand your market, we're going to allow you to use that no matter what sector you're in. And then, of course, the final component, which is the cherry on top, we provide access to financial capital for innovation objectives. So when you put in money, we're going to match that money to support you in bringing in this talent and this infrastructure from the academic institutions. Now, what kinds of projects can we support for you? All types of innovation, all types of research, all types of development. And before I go into the graphics, I want to just focus on the word all. It seems very minimal on this slide, but it's actually super important. And if you take one thing away from this slide, that's the word, all types of innovation. So like I mentioned, all sectors. No matter what sector your company is, we're happy to support you. All sizes of companies. You could be one person, you could be 500 people. We're happy to support your company. All types of disciplines, as I mentioned. So anywhere from, a quantum physicist all the way to a psychology student. If you needed a music student, we'd be happy to support you. Also, all types of companies, both in Canada and abroad. So all of these kinds of all types of things that I'm talking about also translate to you in Brazil as well. Now, in terms of the type of project, we're pretty open to, in terms of, technology readiness level or what some people consider the innovation continuum, we're happy to support. So on the one end, you have, fundamental research, new product development, something at the very, very beginning stages, we're happy to support that. Once you're going into more of the, mid-range in the innovation or TRL scale, we're also happy to support that. Once you kind of get to that commercial level and you want to start understanding the packaging, the market assessment, the market preparation, the adaptation to a new market, even here in Canada, we're also happy to support that. Ultimately, the way that our programs work is to basically fill a gap and provide a solution. So you have a gap in your company, there's something that your company needs. The intern is going to provide that solution to that gap. Another thing to mention here is, as we mentioned in an earlier slide, there is a large fund of money that we have to support companies to work with interns at academic institutions. So you can apply at all times of the year. You can apply for all of the projects that you want. So you could even have 2 projects with 2 different institutions going at the same time. And even once those projects are done, you can apply for another one in the future. Our success rate for our programs are above 95%. And so basically, as long as you have all of the right people in place and you have a well-formed application, you are basically guaranteed to get that funds. Now, a part of the reason why it's so accessible to get and we have such a high success rate is because of our national team that is dedicated to support companies, essentially. So there's about 90 of us all across Canada. This is the team that I work for. And they are meant to be there for companies, researchers, not-for-profits, to support them, one, getting to know each other, but also to support them in the development of their Mitacs program applications. Like I mentioned before, these people are really integrated into the Canadian innovation ecosystem. So I mentioned that we have all of these amazing relationships with companies and universities. Some of them are even actually based at these companies and institutions. So we are very understanding of what is going on. If you come to me and you say, Gina, we want to know what's going on in ocean tech, what kinds of institutions are doing what kinds of research at ocean tech, I can ask my colleagues across Canada that have relationships in institutions and companies that are doing that to give you an idea of what kinds of things you can do in terms of working bilaterally with those entities. Then it goes one step further. Say you say, okay, I want to, find an intern and a professor that are doing X, Y, and Z skills and expertise in the ecosystem. I can actually have my team introduce you to those professors and those interns. So you would provide me basically with a job description and a project description, and I would source that across Canada to then introduce them to you so that you can move forward with the Mitacs program application. Innovation solutions. As we mentioned in previous slides, there are so many ways that you can use Mitacs programs. Again, very, very novel research when you're just starting the, very fundamental idea that you have in tech, and then all the way to taking that tech that you've been working on into the commercial and development space. So we have someone who is actually assigned to your company to basically help you navigate that entire roadmap through our programs. So you would start with one, and then they would say, you know what, now that you've moved past that project, why don't you try this one, or this program is better. So they're really there to help you understand how Mitacs is going to best suit you. And then trusted advisors. Once they tell you which programs to use and show you the application package, that relationship doesn't stop there. Even once you start developing your application and putting it together with the institutions and the professors, you can actually send a version of your application to your Mitacs advisor, and they'll actually look it over for you to tell you if it needs adjustments, if you need to make any comments. And that's why the success rate is so high, is once you submit it into Mitacs for approval, it's already been through someone's eyes that it's on our team. So it's a very, very high success rate. Now, more practically, in terms of how you can use our programs and what those programs look like, we're going to go in a little bit of a timeline of how a company would use Mitacs to have that global growth. So as I mentioned, first would be refining your tech, then it would be getting global ready, encountering your market, getting into your market, and then maintaining global vitality. So getting into that market, but then maintaining not only just having actual success and growing within those new markets. So in terms of refining your product or service, that kind of early TRL level, very fundamental research, what does that program look like? Well, as I mentioned, you're getting expert supervised skilled talent. So the basis of this program is that you're going to have a student at a Canadian university, college, or polytech doing research for you. And that can be anywhere between college and then, if you decide to incorporate in Canada, up until recent graduates. So you can have an undergrad, a master's student, a PhD student, or a postdoc student. They're going to be working with your company starting at 4 to 6 months, but that can become as large of a project as you want. The largest project that we have to date is about 5 years long. Now, for each one intern for 4 to 6 months, your project funding starts at 7,500 Canadian plus tax, which we then match. So for one intern for 4 to 6 months, that intern is going to get $15,000 to work on your company's project full time. Again, this intern can be in any discipline, any sector. Even if you wanted 2 interns on one project in 2 different disciplines, you could do that. And as I mentioned, this is short to long-term projects as well. So if you wanted just to stay at the 4 months with one intern, great. If you wanted to do 2 years with 10 interns on one project, also great. We're happy to support whatever is needed, as I mentioned, to take that gap in your company and to find the solution. A company that did this was a company called Experience First Design. They took a PhD student in computer science, and they had that student adapt their technology to be ready for global markets. So even from the inception of the technology, they were starting to design it with the international competition in mind to make it the most competitive and vital product once they were to go into the commercial phase. But as I mentioned, even beyond this kind of technological, more fundamental research phase, you can also use Mitacs to design your international strategy. So say you wanted to use a business student, an econ student, or a law student to look at international free trade agreements, positioning your company within free trade agreements, positioning your technology within free trade agreements or a market. You can also use business students to do that. So when you are still a Brazilian company, it needs to be still broadly accessible research. But if you decide to also incorporate in Canada, that's when you can make it a little bit more specific. Canadian companies are allowed to have what is known as white papers, so more market-based research rather than marketing research. A company that did that was Speech Bubble. So they actually used our program with a business student to understand how their technology, now it wasn't specific to their technology as a company, and this is where it goes into the marketing research rather than the market research, but they were able to say, this is our profile of technology. How would Europe market use our profile of technology? What kinds of things would we need to adapt in this profile of technology for Europe to want to pursue using this and for it to be successful and competitive within that market? And this is something that you could do, say, for example, if you wanted to come into Canada, you could say, how would this profile of technology or this profile of company with a Brazilian background pursue market competitivity within Canada? So that's something that you could do. It's the same program. It's the exact same portions that we talked about in the previous slide. It's an intern anywhere from undergraduate till postdoc, starting at $7,500. Any sector. So even if you wanted to have, 2 students, a business student and a student that is within your technology profile, you can do that. And then again, anywhere from 4 months all the way until 5 years, whatever makes the most sense. Going a little bit more into the structure of the program, as I mentioned, it would be one intern, which is one researcher. So again, any discipline, anywhere from college up until postdoc. That student has to have a professor from their institution supervising them. So you're not only getting the researcher and the intern supporting you with the project, but you also get the expertise of their professor who is supporting them and supervising them in their research full-time on your project. It can start at 4 months and it can go anywhere, like I mentioned, up to 5, but the base is 4 months and it's one partner company, which is going to be you. And this is where this little block is going to cost $7,500 Canadian plus tax. Now think of this little unit as a Lego block. So you can build this up to be in any type of structure that you want. So you can take those little blocks and add them up in any way that makes the most sense for your project. Now, we don't always expect, our programs, they're complex because we understand that the solutions that you're looking for are complex. So you don't need to worry about figuring out this structure completely on your own. Like I mentioned, you have my team across Canada who's there to support you in understanding the best way to use these little blocks and building that structure for yourself. Now, you might wonder, how does it look as a Brazilian company? Well, as I mentioned, you will have a Canadian academic, a Canadian student, and a Canadian professor at any Canadian institution across Canada working with your company. That student in the middle, or students in the middle, are meant to spend 50% of their time at the Canadian institution and 50% of their time with your company in Brazil. And the reason we want this is for a few reasons. One, we want that intern to get commercial experience. So we want them to come out of their program ready, not only if they wanted to pursue an academic career, but also an industrial career. And that could mean also with your company. If you wanted to hire them afterwards, We have seen that happen multiple times, even for international companies, and especially if that international company ends up incorporating in Canada to have a sister or a subsidiary, they usually hire those Canadian interns as their first employees. Now, once you decide to become incorporated in Canada as well and have your headquarters in Brazil and a subsidiary in Canada, you can continue to do this, except now you're the Canadian company and you are bringing in interns from Brazil or anywhere in the world. So you can use your Canadian company, your subsidiary in Canada, as a way to continue working with your contacts in Brazil that are at institutions, and also bring in interns if you wanted to bring in interns into your Canadian subsidiary from the United Kingdom or Mexico or Germany or Taiwan or Korea. You could also do that. And we're still following that same structure that we saw before. One intern for 4 months as the base, 7,500 Canadian, still the same. Now, once you decide to come into Canada, there's an added program that you'd be able to use that ACATE would be able to support you with their connections as an incubator and accelerator. And that's the Mitacs Entrepreneur International program. And that program allows Canadian startups to get $5,000 up to 5 times to visit almost any market in the world, to do venture capital seeking, to do identifying of collaborators, either for joint ventures or international innovation projects. So as I mentioned, if you obviously have contacts in Brazil, you've got that market covered, but you wanted to go to the United Kingdom to meet professors and interns in the United Kingdom to do bilateral projects there, you'd be able to use this fund to get into the UK market. And our friends at the Canadian Embassy and Canadian consulates in Brazil will be able to tell you all about these advantages, but I'll give you a little, sneak peek at what they'd be able to tell you. There's a lot of reasons why coming into Canada and using Mitacs would be able to support you. First and foremost, the global talent advantage. As I mentioned, you wouldn't only be able to use all of the talent in Canada, but you'd also be able to use any talent in the world as well, using our programs. And we actually support bringing in these interns through what's known as the Global Skills Strategy. So it's about a 2-week expedited immigration process that's actually built into our programs that supports you to bring these interns in. Global market access, as I mentioned, you saw in the previous slide, you'd be able to get market access into a lot of the places where Canada has free trade and diplomatic partners. Up to 5 times, $5,000 for 2 full-time employees. Stable infrastructure. There's a lot of different kinds of things like the SHRED program, which provides tax credits to people that are doing research and development. Some companies have even used their contributions to Mitacs as a way to also get SHRED credits as well. So you'd have to check with a specialized person within that space to see if you'd be able to, but that has happened. R&D Gateway, there's a lot of research and development programs and funding here in Canada, and we're actually partners with a lot of them. So we even have aligned programs with things like the National Science and Engineering Research Council, so you can get that program funding as well as ours together. Same with the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. They show you across Canada all of the different research and development infrastructure that's available. We have someone who is actually co-funded. So they're both an employee of Mitacs and the Canadian Foundation for Innovation to help companies understand the ways to use both of our programs. And we also, even through ACATE, have a national network of incubators and accelerators for startups like yourselves to get connected into that ecosystem and to use some of the other programming that's available. And I know we were just talking even before the webinar, and ACATE has some really exciting things going with college-based incubators and accelerators, so keep out for that in the future. Now, before we go into the question part of the webinar, I want to talk about a Brazilian company who was able to use everything that we talked about to the full advantage, and that's Alves Agritech. So they actually, even before being incorporated in Canada, had 2 projects with the University in New Brunswick to improve their technology. So they had interns from the University in New Brunswick traveling to Brazil and working between their university and Brazil to really update the technology at Alvas Agritech to make it competitive for the Canadian ecosystem. Once they finished these programs, they became a global company by incorporating in Canada and are based now in New Brunswick because they started to have that really strong ecosystem in New Brunswick. They had that innovation community by using Mitacs to develop these relationships. And then even once they incorporated in Canada, they continued to champion Brazil innovation in Canada and bilaterally by using our programs. And one of the ways that they did that is they used our program once being in Canada to work with McGill University on this project for soybean. So they took their technology that was in Brazil, they came to Canada, incorporated in Canada, and then started to use the Canadian ecosystem through Mitacs to adapt their technology and become even more competitive and applicable to the Canadian ecosystem. Now, the super cool thing here is that the intern that they hired, who was even at McGill, they were an international student at McGill that they hired, was actually Brazilian. So this student was able to be based at a Canadian institution, working with a Brazilian but Canadian incorporated company, and pulling all of these pieces together, which was all half paid by Mitacs. So there's a lot of potential for you to start using Mitacs now, get acquainted with the Canadian market, build a community within the Canadian market, incorporate and have, 2 presences, continue to have your Brazilian headquarters, now have a Canadian presence, obviously using ACATE and our embassies and consulates in Brazil to build that strength in the Canadian market, and then continue to support Brazilian innovation ecosystem and become competitive in Canada once you incorporate in Canada. Now, before we go, I'll just say this is how the next steps go. First and foremost, after today, where do you go from here? Well, you can connect with your colleagues at ACATE and they'll introduce you to myself, and I will then pass you off to whoever is best suited for your company. We have sector experts, we have regional experts. So I'll be able to get you in contact with someone that will be able to sit down with you and say, okay, where is it that you want to go? Like I said, what are the gaps in your company? That's where we want to go. It's really not for us to say where you should go. We want you to first tell us what your objectives are as a company. And then we'll work with you to say, okay, on this objective or this gap that you want to pursue a solution for, here's where you use our programs. So we'll have that conversation with you to really understand how you best can use Mitacs. Then we decide within the scope of our programs, which program we should pursue first, how many interns, how much funding, which institution. And like I mentioned, that's where we start searching across Canada to identify that expertise. You give us that profile, we really want to do something in the space of AI, or we really want to do something in the space of quantum, let's say. We'll support you in finding that research in Canada. Then we'll help you find those interns. You'll then work with your Mitacs representative that I introduced you to at the start to develop that application, as I mentioned. You submit it, and then about 10 to 14 weeks later, you'll get the approval or the request to just alter it a little bit. And then once you're allowed to start the project, we provide the funding through the Canadian institution to hire the intern to do your project. Of course, we would always like to thank our funding partners in Canada, all of the provinces who give us funding as well. And we'll now, I guess, go into the question period of the program.
Hi, Gina, again.
Hi.
Oh, first, before the questions, we have a couple of questions here, but just to note, 31 people was watching the
Amazing.
video right now. For me, was amazing. As someone said, this is amazing. A right jump to go global. Someone
Perfect.
wrote this. In a summary, people, did you see how many opportunities we have here with Mitacs? Even for me, I know Mitacs 1 year, Gina. What you showed was amazing. I learned a lot of more. Thank you so much. The first, I love the case. You explained a lot of more than I knew before, and I like it when you talked about building your international strategy. This for me, I think, was the best, because before you go to another country, you need to understand more if you have market there, right?
Totally.
The same happened for Canadians to go around the world. And let's start with the first question. Valmoli from Brasil had, correct, Valmoli, asked, let me see the question here. Is the first step for a Brazilian company to, what is the first step for a Brazilian company to access the fund?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first step is always going to be meeting with someone on my team. And it's really that simple, because we're just going to work with you to really understand at first, what is the first project that you want to do, right? There's so many different projects that you could do. So what is that first project? And so really narrowing that down. So like I mentioned, leaving today, what is the first thing that you do at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to get going with Mitacs? It would be to reach out to your colleagues at ACATE and to say, we're interested in pursuing a relationship with Mitacs and Mitacs programming. And then they would pass you off to myself and my team. So your very first step is to let ACATE know that 1, you love this webinar, and that 2, you'd like to be connected to Mitacs so that we can meet down with you one-on-one with your company and start going over the specifics of which program and which project we're going to pursue first.
Perfect. Remembering everybody, we have a thematical group, international thematical group inside ACATE to help you with these kind of questions, okay? The second one is from Clara Elisa. This travels funds to access another market. Oh, thank you. To another markets only works once I have a company in Canada established, right? Is there any minimum time that I need to be in Canada market to access this fund?
Yes. So you do need to be incorporated in Canada first to access this fund. Now, the incorporation into Canada is actually really fast. We were talking just prior to the webinar, the part that might be a little bit more difficult is the immigration component, but the folks at the embassies and the consulates are probably there to provide you more information on that. But that said, the actual incorporation of a company in Canada can happen pretty quickly. I've heard the average is about 3 days, I think, to incorporate in Canada. So it's usually pretty quick. Now, once you're incorporated in Canada, the limit that we have as eligibility is basically just how long you've been with the incubator or accelerator. It's not based on how long you've been incorporated. It's just your relationship with the incubator or accelerator, which is actually still not that much either. It's only 3 months. So I don't know if you'd want to get incorporated in Canada and travel anywhere even before 3 months. If you do, you're very well prepared. But it's 3 months. So essentially, if you get incorporated in Canada, start with the Canadian incubator accelerator. It has to be based at a university. We have a list on our website. So if you are curious to know which incubators and accelerators are eligible for that program, we can send you that link. But it's 3 months, essentially 3 months with the incubator accelerator before you can access the program.
Nice. And remembering people again, we have a partner in Waterloo that can help us, okay? ACATE is there. ACATE is doing a mission to Collision this year to know this place. The next question, Gina, is from Guilherme Rossoni. The first contact with Mitacs has any costs?
No. We get this a lot. Most people say, what's the catch? What's the catch with Mitacs? It's too good to be true. Where do we have to pay other than in the programs? Because we're funded by the Canadian government and the provincial governments, and we are a not-for-profit. When you meet with my team and the people that we have across Canada, our job is just to support companies that want to support Canadian innovation and Canadian innovation through global innovation. So there's no cost. When you meet with me and my team once, twice, 5 times, 10 times, 15 times, there's no cost. The only time you'll ever have to contribute dollars is once you actually have the program and you're funding your project.
Perfect. Sounds amazing, Guilherme sent. Daniel Diaz right now. Is it exclusive for Brazilian-based companies or for a startup based in Barcelona?
Yeah, that's a super good question. International companies based anywhere. We have a list of about 43 eligible countries, Spain being one of them. So I can send also a list to the eligible country list. But in this specific case, yes, Barcelona would also be eligible.
Oh, you know the list in your head. So...
I don't know if I could list all. It wouldn't be alphabetical. I could say that. It wouldn't be alphabetical.
Amazing. Renan Justino asked, UD company is a cannabis technology company focused on integration other countries company into Brazilian market. We do research already with universities in Brazil, PK and observational trials. Cool. I think it's not a question, but
I guess I could look at it as a case study and let you know. So in terms of at least cannabis technology, we're very, very open to work with cannabis companies. Obviously, Canada, I think it was, 2020 or somewhere before that we legalized cannabis. So there's a lot of research going on in this space, specifically within the eastern maritime part of the country. So there is a lot of research going on in that space, and we have seen a lot of researchers move forward with collaborations through Mitacs. Now, in terms of, like you mentioned, working with universities in Brazil, if you wanted to work with the universities in Brazil, or I think it's at the UK, I'm assuming, you would be able to use those relationships, but you would have to do it as a Canadian company. So you would basically incorporate in Canada, use Canada as your R&D platform for the world. A lot of companies, even super large multinationals, have basically put Mitacs as a foundation to open research and development hubs in Canada. And so Canada is no longer kind of like a sales place. It is a space for research and development. So if you were to incorporate in Canada, you could do cannabis research, not only with Canadian institutions, but with institutions also in Brazil and the UK or anywhere else in the world. Yeah.
Nice. We have, let me open again here. Cristiano Policarpo is asking, Mitacs is a good fit for a non-profit blockchain project?
So I'm looking for non-blockchain project. So there is a little caveat when it comes to working with not-for-profits. We are not able to work directly with international not-for-profits. However, we're able to work with Canadian not-for-profits. So if the not-for-profit were to incorporate in Canada, we would be able to support your project. The other way that we can support international not-for-profits is if you find a Canadian partner. So if you find a Canadian not-for-profit, a Canadian company that is there to kind of be, you have a bilateral joint venture project, and the Canadian company is the main company on the or the main, I guess, partner on the project, and you're there as a collaborator, and the funds are coming from the Canadian part, then you would be able to do that. And the students would work between the Canadian industrial or not-for-profit partner and your not-for-profit partner. So in this case, I'd be curious to know the ins and outs of it. So definitely reach out so that we can meet with you, because there's ways that we can make it happen, even if it's an international not-for-profit.
Nice. Clara I know Clara works in a university. She's asking, is there any opportunities in Mitacs for students here in Brazil to work for a Canada company?
Yes, absolutely. So there is the reverse. It's the exact same thing as it would be basically just on the other end. So just like Canadian students can come down to your Brazil company, we see Canadian companies using students from Brazil as well. It's the exact same structure. So they would spend 50% of their time at institutions, at their institution or their university in Brazil, and then 50% of their time at the company here in Canada. If you are from an academic institution, we do have on our website somewhere right now that is a list of companies that are actively looking for academics to work on their project. You can break it down by sector, by discipline, by keywords. So in my list of links that I'll have, I'm going to send out afterwards, I'll send that one as well. And or if you already have a relationship with a company in Canada, be it someone that was from Brazil and that incorporated there, or any other company, you can start forming a project with them as well.
Nice. Again, Daniel Diaz asking a new question. Do you support a startup go-to-market strategy in Canada with tech landscape, marketing, intelligence, and also assessing Canadian companies?
Yes. So this is where it gets a little bit more niche into the structure of the programs. So as an international company, you are still able to use business and econ students. Now, you could do a market strategy, but it wouldn't be as specific as if you were in Canada. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, what I always like to say is an example that my colleague gave me a while back. And so she said, pretend Tim Hortons, the loved Canadian cafe, was wanting to go into a new market. There's a difference between market research and marketing research. So the market research would be, how would Tim Hortons cups react in Brazil, right? How would the market respond to the exact red Tim Hortons cup in Brazil? That would be market research. Unless you're Canadian, you can't do market research, but you could do marketing research, which would be, how would bright red coffee cups react in the Brazil market? So it's a little bit more accessible to the entirety of the public. It's not as specific to Tim Hortons, but what you could do is you could say, okay, here's my profile of technology from a very base profile level. How would that respond in the Canadian market? What kinds of market is there for that profile of technology? Which province would be best to set up for that profile of technology? And then once you incorporate in Canada, so you have that base, once you incorporate in Canada, that's when you could say your company's name is, well, we had the example in the webinar of Speech Bobble. Then you can take that base foundation from when you're Brazilian, and then you say, okay, now that I'm in Canada, how can Speech Bobble specifically target this market? What kinds of, can Speech Bobble do here and there? But again, that gets really specific. So once you meet with your Mitacs advisor, that's where they'll really be able to help you work through that. And you can say, okay, this is what I want to do. And they'll be able to say, okay, at first you'll be able to do this. Then once you become Canadian, then you'll be able to do this. So they'll really walk through those specifics with you to make sure that you're getting the most out of the programs.
Nice. We have just more 12 minutes. Okay, we can answer just more 2 or 3 questions maximum. We have a lot, Gina. And just remember, everybody, we have a meeting, the thematical international group meeting after this webinar. If you are part of the ACATE group, please go there. We can continue asking Gina there. Gina, just more two or three. Is ERP software in the SaaS model relevant to the program? Luis Carlos is asking.
Yeah, we can support, again, any sector, any kind of technology. So if this specifically is what your company is working on, then we would definitely be able to support you. You'd be able to work with, again, any discipline. So in this specific case, if you wanted to work with an electrical or a software engineer, we'd be able to support you. Going to the previous question, if this type of company in ERP software and SaaS model would want to work with the business student to understand the Canadian business landscape for that specific type of software, we'd also be able to support you. So this can be, it's really relevant to any profile of company. I always use the example of, I literally had a very specific quantum physics company that I didn't even understand what they were doing. And it was so technical and so deep tech. We supported that company. And then we also supported a company that was called Doggy Bathroom, which is exactly what you think it is. So any kind of company can use our programs.
Nice. Our the international director, Lisandro Vieira, is saying amazing presentation, Gina. Thank you. Thanks a lot. One more question. Robson Madaloso asking, which is the best program that I have to apply in the Mitacs website?
So this is where my team is going to come in. The programs, it's really not the best. They're all very just specific to what your company needs. So without us being able to sit down with you and understand what you're looking for, and again, it kind of gets down to that question we were talking about earlier, in terms of, do you want marketing research, market research? Are you super close to being incorporated in Canada? Are you, maybe 3 years out from incorporating in Canada? So all of the programs have a super high success rate. So when we talked about at the very beginning of the webinar, that 95% success rate, that is really for all of the programs. All of the programs come from that really big budget. So they have that really high success rate. So it really just depends on exactly what your company is looking for us to be able to decipher that. And I guess this is a part that I should have mentioned before too, is when you actually apply for the program, your application is actually submitted by someone on my team. So we look over the application package completely because we're the ones that have to submit it. So you don't actually even apply online because we're actually technically submitting and applying for you. So you have to meet with someone on my team to be able to access the programs.
This is my question. Even this happened when I apply for the, let me remember the program here.
The MEI program, the Mitacs Entrepreneur International program.
This is the same. I put all my informations there. I submit the forms, and you read all the documentations, and you inside Mitacs, you apply for me.
Exactly.
All right. Okay. Last question, Gina. This is a good one, Guilherme Rossoni. I think I asked it the same. After being incorporated by a Canadian company, one of the partners will receive a visa to live in Canada.
So, on the website of Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada, technically, yes, because of all of the relief efforts that we've been having going on. Our Department of Immigration is just a little bit behind, unfortunately. We were obviously supporting, the Afghan relief, the Ukraine relief. And then we recently, I'm not sure if you guys saw, but Canada, in the space of immigration, had a strike. So they're really behind on some of their applications. So in theory, yes, there is a program that supports companies to startups specifically to get visas. It's a little bit behind, as Enrique can tell you, but what I would suggest is meeting and reaching out to the consulate or the embassy, the Canadian embassy or the Canadian consulate that's closest to you. If you need a contact and you're not able to reach them, let myself or Enrique know. We do have some contacts there that we might be able to ask them if they can reach out to you specifically, but they'll have the information on all of those programs, and they might even have someone in their office that's immigration related. So yeah, there are a few different programs that you could hypothetically pursue as a startup.
Perfect. Gina said about startup visa, right? This is the program. This kind of program you can start before coming to Canada. You can start online, finding accelerator to help you or consulate, and you can start before coming to Canada. Gina, we are going to the end of this webinar. Again, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
A lot of questions you answer so well. And now, people, we are going to our international thematical group. Who is part of this group, please go to this new link. Thanks a lot, everybody. Some people is saying thank you for you. They enjoyed a lot this webinar, Gina. And don't forget, people, we have a link after this webinar. If you can click in the QR code in the link to fill the form, we will appreciate as ACATE, okay? All right, Gina, thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. See you in the next call if you're there.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.